I hope guys in the previous two lectures you were following along and you designed, as we have seen, your graphics and you have animated your graphics. Now it's time to start sequencing, meaning deciding what's gonna come first and what's gonna come last. Okay, so let's stop the animation. We can see everything. To sequence, obviously you need to see the keyframes for also to tweak the speed of the animation. To see the keyframes, of course, you can scroll down and you can see the keyframes here. Maybe not so much, and scroll down again. Stories like this. Well, there is a shortcut for that is extremely useful. You select a layer and you press the key U, just U, once. Here you are. Now, all the properties that have keyframes are listed. And of course, you can see the properties and their keyframes. If you press U again, then it will close the properties that have keyframes. Cool, that's very fine, but now you can do better. You can select all your layers. Here you are. I just created a lasso on all of them and press the U key once. If I press again, it will close them. So U to see all the properties that have keyframes, and subsequently you will see the keyframes, of course. Fine. So let's look at it carefully here. What do we want to achieve? We want, for example, the background to appear first, then the graphic design, motion graphics, and web design text to appear later on after the background. Not really when the background has settled at 100%, but just before it settles. So how do you sequence your layers? Well, sequencing your layers is about moving your layers around in the timeline with their keyframes. How do you do that? First, make sure that you are in your selection tool and not in your pan behind tool. With your selection tool, you can click on a layer and drag it. Here you are. You see how? So now you are delaying the layer to come in. For example, now you are at 27 frames. If you play your animation, you will notice that this layer will start appearing after 27 frames. Okay, the beginning here is called the in point of the layer. If you want to jump to the in point of the layer, you press I, and it's pretty important, you will see. Let's decide that background, we want it to come out at 10 frames only. To do that, you can start clicking on the timeline indicator and taking it to 10 frames, for example, or simply come over here, type 10, and it's much easier, it jumps to 10 frames. Then you click on the background layer and you start dragging it around. If you press the shift key, then it will snap to the timeline indicator. Cool. So now we have the background delayed with 10 frames. That's not bad. Let's try now to sequence the web design, motion, and graphics. Let's say we want them to come at 20 frames. Here I'm at 20 frames. I can select one and start dragging it, or I can press shift, select all of them, or maybe one by one, like this, pressing Control or Command on the Mac, and click and drag. When I get to the timeline indicator or nearby, I press shift, they snap. Pretty cool. Let's look at our animation now. Very nice. Well, a bit nice, but now I have a slight problem here before I go on. This animation here is too slow. How about if you make it speedier? Well, there is one way to do it, is to start moving the keyframes around. The best way is to reduce the distance in between keyframes. This is the visual distance. For example, you click on one keyframe and you get it near. So you notice web design now is appearing or scaling up much before the rest. Here the animation is speedier. Here the animation has been delayed. Cool. Let's get it back here and let's select all our keyframes. To select all the keyframes, the visible one at least, you click and drag and create a lasso. Notice this is selecting 2 keyframes, for example, and all of them. Then you can click on one of them and decide to make it slow or speedy. Let's make it speedy, just over here. You can work with timing now and decide exactly I want them at 10 frames. Let's go to the in point. I press I and I want to go plus 10 frames. So I will write plus 10 frames, as simple as this, and the time indicator will jump plus 10 frames from where it was. Then let's select the keyframes again and go nearby the timeline indicator, press shift, it will snap. Let's look at our animation now. You notice they became a bit speedier. Okay, more speed will be even nicer. You see how I'm tweaking it? Very easy. Fine. Well, this is beautiful, but not that beautiful. How about if we sequence more? Meaning, we ensure that graphics comes first, then motion graphics, then web design. So we leave the graphic design wherever it is, then we take the motion graphics and push it in. Here you are. Notice there is a kind of snapping here to align your keyframes. And then we do the same for the first layer. And let's play our animation now. Here you are. Actually, it became a very nice animation. Another option I want to show you here, or a switch, is the motion blur switch. This is the motion blur switch. It simulates shutter duration. So you can add a motion blur to a layer, but it won't be visible until you enable the preview within the composition. This one will only enable the preview, will not add motion blur to any layer. The added from here, and you enable it from the composition. Notice now the motion blur. Okay, look at this layer. You notice web design now, it has motion blur. Look how it's appearing. If you remove motion blur, it will be just like this. Okay, very strict. With motion blur, it's like a fast car when you're taking a video. So motion blur can be applied to all layers, and to preview it over here, you need to enable it in the composition. Cool, guys? If I disable it, it will go away. That's for the purposes of speed. Sometimes you might be blurring some very complicated animation and you don't want to see it, you know the effect, you just put it off. If you want to see it, you put it on and it's visible. But when you create your video, if motion blur is checked on a layer, it will be shown in the video. So this is just for a matter of a preview. Cool. So let's run our animation now and look at the effect of the motion blur. Much nicer. You notice, guys, I will show you. Okay, you notice how the rectangle is with motion blur here, and over here the text coming with motion blur. So this is an option that maybe you'll use all the time. It's very nice and it'll give you this effect of a shutter. Now you are very capable to create lots of motion graphics on your videos and images. So please come to After Effects and start training, and I will see you in the next lecture.